can you tell us, since you're here to promote it, about the movie, since it's been very hush-hush?
Nothing. No, this is a drama with an element of fantasy, and it's about a small town and a young man who lives there who's an outsider and is very marginalized and very sort of abused in a lot of ways, and who doesn't have the wherewithal or the chutzpah to leave, but doesn't really have the motivation to get out. He's kind of just drifting, and he discovers a mermaid living in the town's water tower who wants to eat him, and she decides he's honestly too pathetic, so she won't eat him. Like, she just says she just can't. And so they develop kind of a friendship, and then he decides that she's even more trapped than he is, and that he finds some inspiration and decides to help her leave. That's the story.
Do you have a release date?
Not yet. We're finishing up post, and we have a couple of possible ways, but we're trying to get it into theaters and stuff. So it'll be in streaming and all that stuff, but I'm trying to get it into theaters. That's how I try to always do it.
Since it's an independent film, what advice would you give someone wanting to raise money for the independent film?
I just did like a 3-hour podcast on this recently.
Did you?
Yeah, so it's a tough question. There's no exact way to do it. You got to get creative. You really have to believe in your work and be willing to put yourself out there. And one thing is it's not enough anymore to just have something great and a great project and a lot of passion for it. You actually need to be able to understand the business now in order to be able to look your investors or potential investors in the eye and say, this is how you're going to not lose your ass, right? And so it's necessary. And so I've spent almost 20 years learning that and learning how it's changed. And I would advise people to do the same. And don't just to have something great and think that its greatness is going to inspire people to throw money at you, because it's not. You need to understand how to sell it. So that would be my advice.
How long was the shoot for?
4 weeks or so. Pretty standard. These indies, we shoot these things in about a month. Yeah.
It's nowadays when I see independent stuff, it's the wager between, like you said, 4 weeks or maybe a month and a half if they're lucky with the funding.
Oh yeah, man.
But it was
the big ones.
Yeah.
What were some of the difficulties presented to you trying to actually shoot in a wartime in the middle of Arkansas?
I mean, you said it.
Yeah.
You answered your own question. I mean, it was like honestly, the difficulties with that. We built this giant tank, which was what it was. It looked awesome, but the difficulties I think were reflected on the actors. Specifically Bella, because I write reasonably dialogue heavy stuff, and so it's not just like action or anything like that. It's saying very thoughtful lines, and that's hard enough to say lines and act and be good, but then combine that with essentially being wrapped in a giant condom around your legs essentially and floating in a tank of cold water, and then saying these great lines and looking good and sounding great. So I very much admire Bella and her ability to have done as well as she did.
What were your independent film directors that inspired you to kind of get started?
Oh man, independent, I don't know. I mean, I'm the biggest David Lynch fan in the world. He was one of my biggest inspirations, and honestly, the film that made me want to I wanted to be a novelist when I was younger, and and I loved movies, but the film that made me kind of bridge that gap was Raising Arizona, because it was the first movie I'd seen that was cool, and it was really cool, but the dialogue was so intelligent, and they used the words that I like big words that I read in novels, but it worked, and I was like, okay, that's cool. Like, I don't want to do these movies where the dialogue sucks and it's just like so expositionary. It was so great, and so that was honestly the film that it's an amazing film. It's the one that inspired me the most to want to make movies.
Well, Lynch especially, it has that kind of almost mystical a mythical ethos to his films anyway. So
Yeah, I did an even longer podcast about Lynch recently. I think it was just like a 4-hour. I'm not kidding. These guys reached out to me on Instagram. Like, you're a Lynch fan, right? And I was like, you don't know what you're asking.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, come do our podcast. I said, okay. How long is your podcast? It's like a 4-hour thing. I was like, okay. And I think even at the end, they were shocked by my love and appreciation and knowledge for
I might
Lynch.
rival you on that one. I might rival you on that one.
I would take that. I mean, I'm a pretty big Lynch fan. I just respect so much how to simplify this tremendously, just how he approaches telling a story, and he prioritizes theme and emotion over narrative, and nobody else does that. Nobody. Like it's a very poetic way of storytelling, where he goes, okay, I want to make a movie about. He doesn't go like, I want to make a movie about Hollywood and like a young woman who was no. He looks at this unbelievably, almost hard to quantify emotion about the very specific feeling of moving to Hollywood to be an actress, and this weird sense that there's this like chooser of who makes it and who doesn't, and it's so niche and it's so real for anyone who's experienced it. And then he just puts scenes together that communicate that. It doesn't matter. The movie makes no sense. It does not make sense. There's no way you can try to say it as a linear narrative. It doesn't. But you still come away feeling exactly what he wanted you to feel, which is amazing to me. So, anyway.
I want to ask you about casting. So when you're writing and you have like these characters in your head, how do you go about like when you're casting? You're like, okay, that is what I'm saying.
Well, it's interesting because when I write a character, I do have it in my head, and it's never going to be whoever ends up playing that role is never going to be what I envisioned exactly, right? But so what I've learned to prioritize are a couple of things. Number one is obviously like talent in general as an actor and the ability to morph into a character that we create, and then bringing their own, knowing that they're going to bring their own sense, so an understanding of the character. That's the biggest thing, because if all I can do, I've worked with these amazing actors, like John Malkovich and Simon Pegg, and these guys, like, I'm not going to tell them how to act. They know more about it than I ever will. So I just kind of express what the character was in my mind, and then let them tell me the best way to embody that or to convey that. So when I'm casting, I'm looking for different things than just like, oh yeah, this guy looks exactly the way that I thought he was going to look. Like, that's a little tiny piece of it, but it's more like, from a cinematic perspective, is it interesting? Are they portraying something that people are going to want to watch? Are they interpreting my character in a way that is cool and that people would want to see? Mm-hmm. So.
Is the overall idea for this world to turn maybe into a saga or to continue?
Oh, maybe. I don't know. Everything could be. And I hate to say this, and at Comic-Con, this is probably a terrible thing to say, but I hate sequels, man. I am so over the milking of various franchises over and over and endlessly. It's like, I'm not opposed to a sequel that makes sense or was part of the director's initial vision, I would say. Like, if it is a story that legitimately was too big for one movie, which is so uncommon. I mean, it's a lot of times based on the success of the first one. It's never as good. Never. There's never, in my opinion, a direct sequel with one or two obvious examples that people say, like Terminator 2. But it's so not really. Like, I would never. If one day I woke up and went, oh my god, I have another story about one or more of these characters that has to be told, it would be a very honest way of doing it. But if this movie blew up and was a massive success and people were like, is there going to be a sequel, I would just say no, I refuse. So there you go. Yeah. Okay.
If you believe in mythical creatures, aside from the mermaid, of course, which one is your favorite one?
Oh man, vampires for sure. I have shark
Second
teeth.
person.
I got shark teeth. I was obsessed with vampires as a kid. Honestly, I just think they're so cool. I don't believe in any of them. I don't believe in mermaids either. But I love vampire mythology. I just think it's so cool and just so sexy. It's awesome.